Good evening, everyone. My name is Stan Chambers Jr. I am Polaris of the Triangle Iotas, and I would like to welcome you to the third installment in our law enforcement series, where we're going to talk about use of force. And so, the law enforcement series is a series of monthly conversations where we discuss various aspects of law enforcement with the idea of the public gaining a better understanding of how law enforcement works, and for officers to have a better understanding on how the public thinks and perceive things. And so the idea here isn't necessarily to solve world peace or anything like that, but it's a way to start to build bridges of understanding, because oftentimes the only time that the police and the community get together to talk is after something happens, and that something is usually very bad. And so we don't need to wait until something bad happens in order for us to come together and have these type of conversations. And so this is what we're doing. And tonight we have two officers who are going to talk to us about use of force. Now, before we get started, and before these gentlemen introduce themselves, do not hesitate to ask your questions in the comments. And so we like to treat this as more of a free-flowing conversation and not necessarily a lecture. So when you guys have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comments, and we will go from there. And with that, I will ask these gentlemen to introduce themselves.
Officer Jackson, Gaston County Police. I've been policing for 6 years. You can call me Dale. And tonight's guest we have.
All right. Hey, I'm Sergeant Erickson with John C. Smith University. I've been with a municipality. I've been in law enforcement for 22 years.
All right. And so thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And I believe we will have one other guest joining us during our conversation. So don't be alarmed if somebody else just pops into the conversation. So I wanted to start off with just a general baseline of what is use of force and how does use of force work, if you will.
You want me to take that? Let me start off with the North Carolina statute for
use of force. And how does use of force work? I apologize, gentlemen. That is my computer. So go ahead.
Okay. All right. I'm going to start out with the statute, the North Carolina statute of use of deadly force. The North Carolina statute is North Carolina General Statute 15A401. That gives an officer the right to use deadly force if it's warranted, and it basically states that you can use deadly force if yourself or third person is in imminent danger. You cannot use deadly force on a fleeing person just to stop them. You got to use actually a lot of common sense, but you have to, every situation is different, but based on the textbook statute of North Carolina, you cannot shoot to stop a criminal running away, to use deadly force, i.e. your handgun, or when it is reasonable or necessary to prevent an imminent threat or death or great bodily harm or a sexual assault to yourself or others. That's when you can actually use it. So that right there is pretty much it in a nutshell.
And so let's talk about the type of weapons your average patrol officer would have at their disposal, and sort of the, you know what, if one can also explain use of force continuum. Mm-hmm. And how that applies to use of force.
Okay. You want me to take it? You want to get it?
I go ahead. So this before continuum, you have your presence, officer presence. So as an officer just standing there talking to you, going to community day in, day out, they see officers in that community patrolling. That's officers' presence that deters people from committing crimes. That's the first step. The next one will be verbal, which we call verbal judo. Say that I have somebody that was committing a crime in a store, just stealing, shoplifting. Their law prevention officer comes there, talks to them, and from that point in time, when I get there talking with the person that is committing that crime, me just talking to them as a person and not as a suspect or as a criminal, that is basically verbal judo. Or say if somebody is starting to escalate, me just talking to them, talking them down off the ledge to where they're back to calm, cool, and collect, and can act as civilized as possible in the situation. That's basically verbal judo. The next one would be soft hand, hard hands. Soft hands would basically be like guiding. They say I'm guiding, assisting you to a certain direction. Hard hands would be something more so as like pressure points or locks, or basically put my hands on you, put you into cuffs. Then you have less lethal, which you have aspartame, pepper spray. That's all really that my department carries. Those are less lethal. Then you have your lethal, which taser can fall into less lethal or lethal, depends on the department. My department, it falls into less lethal, but we treat it as lethal. So we cannot use the taser for any reason. It has to be somebody that's really actively resisting. When we say active resisting, that's not running away, that's passive. Active resisting is basically fighting and trying to cause officer harm. And then you have deadly force, which is a gun in most people's eyes, but deadly force also be putting somebody in a chokehold. That is not used in police at all, period. But if you're in the sense, or if you're in the mind frame, or you're getting attacked by, or you're getting jumped by somebody has a gun, and you can't get your gun, you have to be able to defend yourself the same way. So chokeholds are not used. We never want to use them, but it's really just a last resort if you're about to be put in harm's way.
And so, what if both of you can talk about what would be a situation where, when you talk about use of force continuum, what would be a situation where you would say you would use hands versus a taser, for example?
For me, I probably used my taser only once, and that's because somebody was coming at with me with a knife. I'm mostly going to be using presence and verbal. Those are my first two, because I can talk a lot of people down by just using my words and talking to them as a person. So for me to use my taser, like I said, it had to be somebody that's actively resisting, like trying to cause me or somebody else harm.
And that's the same for me as well. I second that, because it all starts with police presence. And he talked about verbal judo. That is so important. You can get yourself into a lot of stuff with this mouth, and you can get yourself out of something with this mouth. So it got to be strategic when you're talking to people and knowing how to talk to people. A lot of times when you don't know the norms in a community, a lot of times that will cause you to get into something. So it's all about respect, and make sure you know how to talk to people, because it all starts with this right here, and then you go on with the continuum. But at least give that a chance, starting with that officer present, and then being able to talk to them, and then maybe hopefully that would change the outcome.
And so I actually did receive some questions from one of our viewers. And by the way, for those that are watching live, don't hesitate to post your questions in the comments. I'll see them. And here we go. So we have a question right now. Not related, but I think it's still good to ask. Are non-law enforcement officers able to purchase tasers?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
Are non-law enforcement officers able to purchase tasers?
To my knowledge, I don't believe so, but it really depends on what state you're also talking to.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, and you're not gonna get your hands on the type of tasers that officers carry.
Right.
So the typically they're yellow. You're not gonna get your hands on one of those. But I have seen people with stun guns. So there's that. But in terms of a taser, I don't think you can. So thank you for that question, Deidre. So here's a question. With all that's happened recently, in the past, do you feel that use of force has become, well, you know what? Let me skip that question. Do you feel that the current temperature of society is at a high state, which makes it easier for law enforcement to escalate situations? So here in person, this comes with a scenario. An officer makes a traffic stop, and the motorist begins using profanity towards the officer because he feels that the police have been targeting him. Uh, Clearly frustrated and fed up with the disrespect, the officer retaliates by asking the motorist to get out of the car, in which the motorist refuses. Now there's two hot-headed individuals at odds. The question is, does the officer have the right at that point to use force?
Well, let me say this to you and the viewers. When you're dealing with the public, you have to maintain a level of professionalism because you don't put fire out with a fire. And that's professionalism 101. You have to maintain a level of professionalism and to actively and professionally do your job. When an officer orders somebody out of a car, each situation is different. They may order them out the car to search the car, but I would never order somebody out the car being there by myself. It's all about officer safety as well. You need to be safe. It's also about officer safety, and we need to go home with our families as well. But you have to consider, when you're talking to people and these motorists, you gotta give them respect. And sometimes that they don't go that way, but then you go accordingly and whatever. I just go down the continuum, but you start out with basically respecting all throughout the whole process. You want to respect them, even if they calling you, cursing you out. You're the professional here. You're the professional, but you maintain do your job, but you don't get out of character.
I agree too. I'm not gonna put anybody out of the car unless I have somebody with me. However, I get cussed out on a daily. It's all about verbal judo. It goes back to that. Mm-hmm. Once you let them cuss at you and they vent, once you're able to talk to them as a person, 9 out of 10 they apologize when traffic stop is all over with. But there's no reason to pull someone out of the car if you don't have a crime or why you're taking them out of the car.
Right. So essentially, somebody cursing an officer out is not a reason for an officer to pull somebody out of that vehicle.
No. Cussing somebody is not a crime.
Right.
Now, however, the part of the first question, as far as the way society has been treating police officers now and everything that's happened, I have seen police officers being scared to act now because they're thinking about how social media is going to react to what's going on. Like I've seen where an officer was in the car the whole time where a female had a knife and she was busting out windows and charging towards cops, and they were scared to get out the car. Another officer was scared to take his taser out or his gun out to defend himself. So it really comes down to if they're comfortable now with everything going on. Because you start to see the officers that are scared or the officers that are doing things the wrong way, and you start seeing the officers that are genuine and doing the job the right way.
Right. Another question is, and this is a question with a scenario. Does your firearm training teach you to shoot to kill or shoot to subdue? And let me give the example here. I think a criminal is about 20 to 30 yards away and begins to come at you with a knife or a stick. Do you draw your firearm and aim center mass, or shoot the person in lower extremities, such as the leg or knee? Being that a taser probe can reach between 15 and 35 feet, would you even consider using your taser in this instance?
Well, let me address that, and that's a good question, and I hear it so much, and I think a lot of time people are watching TV. When it comes to, I've heard warning shots. We're trained to stop the threat. And center mass is the biggest part on a person's body to actually kind of stop the threat. Shooting someone in the leg, that person can still come at you. And as far as somebody having a knife versus a knife can kill you too. I've seen videotapes where suspects that sprint at officers and cut them. And it don't take but seconds to get up on you. So a knife is a deadly weapon, and an officer can deploy his or her weapon to stop the threat.
Especially depends on the person wielding the knife. You can be an expert knife or somebody expertise in using knives where it can be worse than a gun, especially in short distances. However, for us trained to be able to shoot center mass, if you look at it this way, say you're 20 yards away and you want us to shoot at the knee, shoot at the leg to stop that threat. What if we miss it because it's that small a target? Then it goes somewhere else and hits somebody else. Then that right there's another situation. Rather we aim for the bigger part of the body where it's a less chance of missing and going somewhere else. We're trained to know our target and what's beyond it, because each bullet that we fire, we are accountable for.
That's correct.
And so,
I was going to say, and what the other officer was saying, yeah, we all have to be considered. We have to consider ricochet. We have to consider penetration, and we have to consider distance. Those three things we have to consider when we fire our weapon. And innocent bystanders getting hit by a bullet from an officer is not a good thing. So we want to make sure we do hit our target, and having a center mass that gives us a greater chance of hitting the target when the threat is coming at us.
Right. Thank you for that. So this next question, these are all questions from one of our viewers. This one includes a video. I have not seen this video. I'm going to try to share my screen, and this looks like this is a news report from ABC News. So, we're gonna get back to this because I can play the video, but I don't think you guys are gonna be able to see it. So, yeah, we might have to skip this question. But again, just to remind everyone, if you have, these are all good questions, but if you have questions of your own, please don't hesitate to place them in the comments. So, but wow, I'm still gonna figure out how to play that video so you guys can see it. So here's another question. How much do you feel the temperament of an officer plays into how quickly they use force or not?
I think it's more so training than temper, but temper does play a part in it. The more training you have, the more comfortable you will be in different situations. As far as less training you have, the more high stress you're going to be and the more quicker you're going to be to use a tool on your belt.
And I agree with that.
So let's see, this is another question that has a video. So how we're doing this, people, for those listening, is we are streaming this live from Zoom. And so this is why it's a little challenging to play the video, because while I can share my screen and you guys out there watching can view the video, the gentleman on the panel cannot, unless, I don't know if they're able to, they have a second screen. Because I work from home, I have like a million screens. So these are two very good questions that involve video, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to play them. I mean, and it wouldn't be fair for me to describe to the officers and for them to base their answers on me describing a video. So, so I'm gonna see if I can do something about that. But meanwhile, let me ask this question. Would you support a national registry that would list all officers who were fired for misconduct and or criminally charged that would prohibit them from being eligible for a future law enforcement job?
I'll start with me. Yes, I would support that.
I would too, and it's also going to be in the news everywhere. So I'm pretty sure once the other agency gets his application, they're going to do all the research and do a background check, and they're going to see that.
So I will
It's
say,
pretty much already, it's pretty already going on. It's just under wraps, basically.
right, right. And so my background is journalism, and for those listening, and I used to cover law enforcement. And so every time an officer got in trouble, that was a story. And so with that, it would make it very hard for an officer to go to another jurisdiction, especially in the same state, because you can just do a Google search. And I remember there was a situation when I worked at WRAL, which is the NBC station in Raleigh, where we had an officer, a former officer, call us and asking us to remove the story of, I don't know if he was arrested or he was charged. Either way, they wanted us to remove the story because he was having a hard time getting employment because of that story. And our stance was, well, you were a public official when you were charged with this crime. And so we can't, and the story was factually accurate. So we can't remove the story. Sorry. So, uh, so we do have a question. How do you feel about community residency requirements from law enforcement officers?
Oh, well, you say community residency programs?
Right. Well, I think by the gist of this question is, so for example, so I live in Durham, and if I decide to join Raleigh PD, I have to live in Raleigh or live in Wake County. I think that's the gist of his question.
Well, I would say this right here. If you are required to stay in the county that you patrol, that may change some of the things that happen as far as people that may go rogue, that may have this idea that, I don't live in this county, I won't have to see these people only when I'm working. But if you know that you're going to be shopping, your children go to school in that same county, you may do things a little different. Now, we all have a standard operating procedure, and we all also have general orders with the police department, and that you need to follow. However, there's a saying: you can legislate laws, but you can't legislate people. People are going to be who they are, and they're going to have their own little sentiments that they want to do and share. So, but I think living in the same county that you preside and work for would change a little bit of things, because a lot of people don't live in the same county. They live maybe 2 or 3 counties over. So, but I don't have a problem. I'll go personally. I've always lived in the county that I patrol, and I do see people that I have arrested. I see people that I have came in contact with, but I have only been professional and respectful, so I don't worry about that.
Pretty much the same. I've actually worked in both, where I had to live in the county and the city, and one where I did not have to. I spent 4 years basically between Raleigh Police Department and at the Wake County Detention Center. And I've ran into most people that I've been dealing with that haven't had any issues. However, I have had other officers in those same departments who have had issues with people because they treat them different ways. If you treat everybody like a person, you're fine regardless.
Regardless. Okay.
So I'm working to, I don't think there's a way that I'm going to be able to play these videos and have you guys see them as well as the audience. So I guess what I'll do is, I don't want to do it, but I'll describe the video to you guys, and I'm sure this is similar to what you guys have either encountered yourselves or have know of all the other officers that have experienced this. So this is a traffic stop, and a woman was pulled over. The woman, the officer asked for a driver's license, proof of insurance. The officer asked the woman to step out of the vehicle. The woman steps out of the vehicle. The officer appears to start to handcuff the woman. The woman starts to resist. And so right now he's using kind of like hard hands, and the woman starts to run, she trips and falls, and that's where there is a physical encounter. And so she was charged with disarming an officer, second degree assault, resisting arrest, and apparently the woman tried to grab the officer's baton. And there's video showing it looks to appear at least two officers on the ground. And I think the issue here, hence the national story, is that it appears that they're trying to subdue the woman. But while doing so, the officer takes out his baton and strikes the woman twice while on the ground. And let's see. And so I think the question here is, so the question isn't the officer using force to get the woman on the ground, but the question is when, and there was a second officer on scene, by the way. So there's two officers and there's a suspect on the ground. It doesn't appear that she's physically fighting. Again, this was apparently cell phone video from across the street, but from what I see, it doesn't seem like she was resisting too much. And the officer took out his baton and struck the suspect twice. And so I guess the question is, if there's multiple officers on top of a suspect who's on the ground, is using a baton a justified use of force?
So just going what you were saying, this goes all the way back to training. When she got out of the car, he should have had her at a disadvantage. I know when I take people out the car, if they have a warrant or I need to get them out of the car, either way, I take them out of the car, but I basically have soft hands, and I guide them out of the car and have them face the door seal. So if they run anywhere, they can't run nowhere besides into the car. So if they try to back, I can push them into the car. Now, from what it sounds like, he just got her out of the car, had her freely, and she took off. Or after they tried to
right. Yeah, he asked her to exit the vehicle. She exited the vehicle, and then the officer attempted to handcuff the woman, and the woman pretty much was like, "What the hell are you doing?" And then she attempted to it looked like she started to run, but tripped and fell.
That's what I'm saying. It all leads back to training. Like that was the first mistake right there. After they got her onto the ground and they both had access to her where they can put handcuffs around her, I don't see why they would use the baton. I would have to literally see the video to see if she was like still active resistant enough for them to use the baton. But I wouldn't, me personally, I wouldn't use it at all, period, in that situation.
Right.
Well, I just want to say, when you have multiple officers and you have one subject, that right there changes the playing field as far as taking that person into custody. I'm going to take you back, and most of your viewers, or you may not remember the beating of Rodney King in L.A. I don't know if you Google it, you can see. But Rodney King back in 1991 was beaten by like about 8 officers out there, including a couple of sergeants. And when they were taking him into custody, it was for a DWI stop. But they beat his butt. They hit him 58 times. Now you have 8 officers out there. Y'all can get on top of him, subdue him, put him in handcuffs. But they beat him first, then they put him in handcuffs, in which that was wrong. So when I hear that, I think about that case, that landmark case with Rodney King, how he got beaten by those officers 58 times by that ass baton. When you had enough officers out there to take him into custody, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. Either way you look at it, it's wrong. I would never do something like that.
Thank you, Dylan. So another question that was video related, and this was more straightforward. And so this is a student at a school. This is another national story. A student is sitting in what appears to be a lobby to a suite of offices. and the officer walks in, forces the student up, puts him up. It looked like he started to put him up against the wall, but then he puts him in a chokehold and has the student in a chokehold, and the student is resisting. So this officer has a student in a chokehold, and they're walking down the hallway, apparently. So I think the lower third, the text in the bottom says that the video shows that the officer used a stun gun on the student. I don't know how, judging by the video. Okay, now they're on the ground. But the incident started when the officer, like, it's clear cut. Student was sitting there, not doing anything, not talking to anyone. And the officer walks in, grabs the student, tells him to get up, and then puts him in a chokehold. And so that seems a little more clear cut. That would, I would imagine,
That's probably unacceptable right there.
Yeah,
That should never have happened. More likely, officers getting charged.
yeah. So, yeah, that one is definitely more clear cut. And this was at a junior senior high school in Pennsylvania somewhere. And apparently the officer says, this is according to the audio, and it's in part, man to man, bro, I don't care if you're effing 14 years old or not, I will punch you in your face.
I think I've seen that one before.
So, yeah. So I imagine that is not with your, and so something that I want everybody listening to understand, that each department is different regarding their application of weapons and techniques. And so, for example, Raleigh PD may have a set of standards to which when officers can deploy or use their tasers, but the Wake County Sheriff's Office may have a completely separate set of rules for when their deputies can use tasers. And so, and it doesn't apply to just to weapons, it applies to techniques. Like these gentlemen said, a chokehold is something they wouldn't, a chokehold is something either A, they wouldn't do, or that's an absolute last resort. But depending on your department and depending on the officer, they may see that different. And so that's one thing about use of force that I would like everyone to understand, is that it can vary from department to department. And I believe the department's sort of rules and procedures, I believe that's public information.
You should be able to Google it.
Yeah. So
For
if you're
policy features.
right, so if you're curious about your local police department, your local sheriff's office, and how they use of force, you can submit a public information request to get that information. So there is another question. Is there enough cultural awareness / sensitivity training offered as part of in-service training for law enforcement officers?
Sorry.
I don't believe I've been to any, but I believe that it's coming soon. It should be there now, honestly, to tell you the truth.
What was the question again?
Is there enough cultural awareness / sensitivity training offered as part of in-service for officers?
No, I don't think it's enough. And just to let you know that I think a lot of things need to change, like as far as, do y'all remember the MMPI, the Minnesota multi-phasic inventory, psychological inventory? It's where they do a psychological exam on prospective officers that are trying to become police officers. It's called MMPI.
That doesn't ring a bell. That doesn't come to mind for me.
Okay. Well, it's a psychological test to kind of screen officers when they go through to become a police officer. It's a psychological exam. Okay, well, some of the questions on there are very archaic and they're very outdated. And I think that right there needs to change and put in some more direct questions when you're asking these potential applicants of, do they belong? One of the questions is, do you belong to a hate group? And they can say no. But if you dig a little deeper into the weeds and ask questions that's going to really make them give more than a yes or no answer, then maybe you can weed those people out that would go rogue or have racial biases towards certain groups of people. So I think that needs to change. Sensitivity training and all this other training that you get in service, it's one thing, but while they're in there, they sign off on it, and then when they get out, they can go back to being the same old way. Like I said before, you can legislate laws, but you can't legislate people. People behavior is going to be what they are. However, if you have something in place that can weed them out, they will never make it in there. So that needs to change. Or that psychological exam needs to change a little bit. Needs to be tweaked a little bit.
So I have a question for you gentlemen. Has there been a situation where you were, according to your training, had the right to use a certain level of force, but didn't?
Yes, I have. I've been in a situation like that. When somebody had a weapon, and it's this thing we have called officer discretion. We all have it, and it was my discretion not to use deadly force on this person. Able to get her in and take her into custody, and nobody got shot, nobody got killed. But I use my discretion, and what you have to do in an officer, and this comes with training and experience and age. You view things very carefully, and you watch, and what you do, you make decisions based on what you see, and think the outcome could be a little different, could come out a little different because you actually use your discretion not to use deadly force.
So in that situation, what was it that made you decide to not use deadly force?
In this particular case, it was a woman. She had a weapon. She never pointed it at me. She never pointed the weapon at me, and I was able to get her to drop the weapon, but she had a weapon. So it was one of those things where I used my discretion.
But
If she had raised it up, that the level of threat would have been higher.
right, and so with your training and with the department you were with at that time, because the person was showing their weapon, or they had the weapon in hand, not necessarily raised and pointed, but just the mere fact you had it in your hand. With your training, you had the right to pull your weapon and point it at her.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, okay.
So I have a similar situation. Just a little backstory. I've been in multiple instances where I've had the right to pull my gun, or I had a gun put out on me at my work. I've been shot a couple of times, so I've been able to process things a little bit easier instead of going to straight attack mode. It was an instance where the lady had a machete, and she was far enough where she was walking towards us, where we could have went ahead and drew out and fired. The way we do is contact cover. So I had a gun, my partner had a taser, and I asked for him to tase the female. She did not do it. He did not do it. So after she got close enough, instead of me firing my gun, I practiced enough drawing my weapons to do it without even thinking about it. So I was able to holster my gun and put my taser out fast enough to where I can tase her instead of shooting her. However, there have been other times where having a taser in your hand is bad, where you should have a gun. So it really depends on the officer and the training and how comfortable you are and with changing your tools on your belt.
Now, you don't hear that often, but that does happen where you have an officer that says, I meant to pull out my taser, but they pulled out their handgun instead. And so I know that typically if you're a righty, if you shoot with your right, your taser's on your left. So, or it's more like in the middle, so that you should be able to, theoretically, an officer should be able to tell the difference, if you will. And so, how much training goes into that?
Well,
Well, go ahead. You go ahead. As far as training with a firearm, it's required for us to do it at least once a year.
Sorry to cut you off. I mean, training in terms of um, pulling your firearm versus pulling your taser.
So my department, I haven't had that done at all. I haven't had it done at Raleigh. It's just something you hear about all the time. And when you go home before you even go to work, you're supposed to pull your taser out anyways and fire, make sure it works. So I always practice pulling both weapons out whenever I need it. Actually all my weapons, my gun, my baton, my taser, or my pepper spray. So I know where it's at my belt. So that way when it happens, I'm not fumbling around, it's just muscle memory. So it's really up to the officer to do it. It's him or herself.
And I do the same thing. I know where everything is placed on my duty belt, and I used and I practiced with it. We have to pull the cartridge out and dry fire it, just make sure it's working, because that's the worst feeling you can have is when you need it and it don't work. I don't fire my gun, but I do dry fire, to practice getting it out the holster. But those things you do have to be familiar with. You got to be comfortable with. So when you do get in a situation where you need it to use it, you'll be familiar with it.
So for Sergeant Erickson,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like the rules, since you've worked, for a traditional police department and you currently work for a campus police department, when it comes to using force, do you think different at all because you work on a college campus, you're dealing with teenagers and young adults,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so is the use of force different because you're on a college campus?
Well, it's gonna be the same as far as let me say this. You don't ever get too comfortable where you think that nothing can't happen because you're on a college campus. If you know, back in 2007 at Virginia Tech, there was a active shooter there, and they shot up a lot of people. College campuses have been in the news a lot, where gunmen's coming on campus and doing things, and you got to realize wherever you have students, you're going to have people that don't go to school there are going to be traveling there. So the level of danger or awareness, I should say, it should be the same as if I was out on the street as a municipality. But I do know that the students are here to get their education. That's their primary goal. But there's sometimes things do happen where you do have to arrest people. There's sometimes crimes do take place. But I don't let my guards down because I am on college campus, but I do exercise a lot of compassion because the students are here to get the education. But my antennas are still up.
Right. So again, for the people listening, if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them in the comments. And so, since I don't see any new questions, so when it comes to use of force, and this will be the last question, unless anybody else chimes in. When it comes to use of force, what would you want people to know? Like your average citizen, like what should they know about use of force?
Okay, well, I'll start this off. The use of force, first of all, you only have a split seconds to make a decision. You have a couple seconds to make a decision. And a lot of times they could be life or death, depending on which way you go. When to shoot, not to shoot. When to pull your weapon, not to pull your weapon. If there's a threat, you as that officer, you got to make a decision within seconds. And you want to make sure you're making the right decision by doing whatever you have to do as far as within the law, within policy, and you want to make sure the outcome is a good outcome and it's justified. But you only got a split second, and a lot of times, I don't think sometimes the general public don't think about that. What officer has to think about before doing it, because you're in control. When that officer's there, you're in charge. You're in control of that situation, and everything is on you. So we will hope that each officer will make the best decision and acting accordingly, and for the safeguard of the community and everybody. But you only get a couple of seconds, and I do a lot of praying, and that's just me. I do a lot of praying. You have to when you're out here. Every time I put on this uniform, you have to pray, and that's what I do.
I second everything you said. I mean, honestly, we want to go home just as much as you guys want to go home. Nobody wants to use deadly force.
So on that note, and because I see no more questions, thank you, gentlemen, for taking time to talk to us tonight about use of force and how it works and walking through some scenarios. And definitely thank everyone out there watching this video for taking time to watch us live. So, and of course, just as we're getting ready to go, there's always a question. But I think this is a good question. So the insurrection at the Capitol, we all know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on how law enforcement could have responded more effectively with such a big crowd? So I think I want to mold this question a little bit in context with our conversation. And so when faced with this, like you notice that in the videos, I don't think there was an officer that pulled their gun. I don't.
Where the lady got shot.
Okay, the Air Force veteran. Okay, sorry. But other than that, most of the footage you see, the officers, they don't have any weapons out, actually, and so in a situation like that and of course people would think, well, okay, an officer has their handgun, they probably have 2 extra clips. Why didn't you use your handgun? Why didn't you use your pepper spray? And so just talk to me about your thoughts of use of force in a situation like that.
Okay, well, I'll start out. First I'm gonna start out with the insurrection was despicable, and it was an embarrassment to this great country called America. Now, I would say, having said that, we live in 2 Americas, because when those people they call patriots came there, which that's not nothing that patriots do when they assault police officers. They assaulted law enforcement, beat them with flags, same flags that said that were on the fields when Kaepernick was kneeling, peacefully kneeling. Them same flags, they used them to beat those officers. And I have a problem with that, because when you say you believe in law and order, well, that was not law and order. And when prior to that, when the murder of George Floyd came about, the Black Lives Matter folks went to Washington, and they were met with National Guardmen. They were met with law enforcement, and they were peacefully protesting, because the Constitution said we can peacefully protest. But in this insurrection, it was like, okay, y'all are here. You're not met with the same force. So that's why I say we live in 2 Americas. That wasn't right. And if you can't call out your brothers in law enforcement under the shield, then you just complicit as the others are. I feel like you should be able to call out something. This young man up here, if he's in Gastonia, he's doing something, he's not doing it right, I should be able to come to him and say, that wasn't right. I don't appreciate that. That's not good. We got to hold each other accountable. And without the accountability, stuff like this continues to happen. We had to call out one another in our own fraternal organization. We had to call them out. And I think it was wrong. And I don't appreciate that. I think that everybody involved in that should be prosecuted to the legal limits of the law.
So, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I say he hit nail on the head.
So so in that situation, so in that instance, regarding use of force, so with your individual departments, if you're obviously, ideally, you wouldn't be by yourself, but in a case where, okay, make it more. Let's say you gentlemen are responding to a call, let's say shooting, and you get on scene, you're the first officer there, and there are 30 to 40 people already riled up, and they see you and they want to come at you. And so, how do you respond in a situation like that regarding use of force?
I'll let you
So
go.
there's still an active shooter, or is the shooter just there somewhere in the neighborhood? Kind of explain what about shooter part.
Think less about the shooter and more the 30, 40 people coming at you.
Okay. I've kind of been in a situation a little bit, as far as in a big crowd where they're not happy with the police. I've been able to step aside and pull them to the side and talk to them, try to figure out why they're mad and why they're doing what they're doing, and then go from there. But at that point in time, you already have backup coming anyway. So when they come there, they're going to set up a perimeter and just make sure nothing gets out of hand. You got to control the chaos.
And they can get out of hand really quickly. It can go left really quickly.
I've seen that. I've actually experienced that myself, not as part of a mob, but as a journalist. And so I covered the 2016 RNC, Republican National Convention in Cleveland. That was an interesting experience. And of course, the difference is there was a ton of law enforcement. But while there was still a ton of law enforcement, you had protesters where things suddenly turned left. And it wasn't as bad as what happened at the Capitol, but I've been in the middle of a mob where things go sour really fast. And so that's just a interesting predicament to be in, no matter what side you're on.
Most of the time it starts out peaceful. It's just that one person that gets in there and kind of incites the riot and makes it worse. Because everybody comes there for a purpose, and we come there for a purpose, and then you have the people that come there to wreak havoc.
So, like in a situation like the Capitol, if officers fired their weapons, now I get that the one officer who shot and killed the woman, I get that.
It was a Secret Serviceman. It was a Secret Serviceman that did that.
Secret Service, okay. And so, if say multiple officers, like they just saw the crowd coming at them and they just immediately just opened fire at the crowd, would that be a justified use of force?
At the crowd?
Why are you shooting at the crowd? That doesn't make sense. There's no purpose of shooting at a crowd.
No.
Even when they're coming at you?
They're coming. I mean, it's still. It really depends on how they're coming at you, because they can be still passive. They can be walking towards you, whether what kind of demeanor they're walking towards you.
Think of when the perimeter was breached, and how the people, the insurrectionists, were forcing their way into the Capitol building. Kind of like that.
They still had no weapons in their hands, right?
Okay. No weapons.
So I mean, why do you have your gun out shooting and they have no weapons in your hands?
Okay. And so what if, say, because like you're saying, excuse me, what about like a flagpole? Sorry,
Well,
allergies.
that can use as a deadly weapon.
That's yes, it is.
Gotcha.
But still, if that one person has that weapon, why are you shooting at the crowd and not trying to eliminate that threat.
Mhm.
You shooting at the crowd, you're basically just committing murder wherever your bullet lands.
Right, and I do apologize to everyone. I'm not a native North Carolinian, and as such, I get allergies every year, and they suck. Um, so, uh, so thank you for that. Thank you for that. And so, not seeing any of the questions going once, going twice. Uh, Again, thank you, Officer Dell. Thank you, Sergeant Erickson, for taking time to talk with us. This recording will be um, will be me coughing because, of course, I'm on camera and I always want to have a coughing fit. That's how it goes.
That's usually how it goes.
That's usually how it goes. And I was doing so well. I apologize for that, everyone. So this recording will be on our website, triangleiotas.org, this evening. Like I mentioned earlier, this is this conversation is part of our law enforcement series, but the law enforcement series is also part of our greater Time to Build initiative. And so this initiative was actually born following the death of George Floyd, and just thinking of ways we can build our communities, especially our Black communities. And so last year we did a series of workshops around voter education, and it's not just vote, 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 but it's here's how your vote works, here's what's impacted by your vote, and other things such as electoral college and gerrymandering. And so this law enforcement series falls right into that vein. And so if you don't already, of course, follow us on this Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, Triangle Iotas, and thank you everyone for being a part of this panel and for taking time to listen this evening. So stay safe, wear your mask, get vaccinated. I'm getting vaccinated tomorrow, which is a big deal because I am terribly afraid of needles. Little known fact, I don't like needles. So, but stay safe, and I look forward to seeing all of you in our next conversation.